Order. Welcome to this meeting of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee. Before we begin, I need to remind members to declare any interests before they ask their questions, because today we are discussing the work of Ofcom with Dame Melanie, Dawes, its Chief Executive, and Lord Grade of Yarmouth, its Chair. Welcome to your first appearance before us this Parliament. In March, we heard from Tim Davey and Samir Shah, and last month we heard from Surrey and Cheshire and Alex Mahon from Channel 4. In fact, since then, Alex has announced her decision to step down from Channel 4. We hope that that's unrelated and it won't impact you after this meeting today. But actually, I know successive committees have been impressed with her stewardship as the broadcaster, at the broadcaster, and we do wish her well in that role. But building on from what we heard from the BBC and Channel 4, and then ahead of the Charter Review later this year, I think today's a good opportunity for the committee to consider all those kind of areas of broadcasting across all media, but also some of the other concerns we have around the online safety. So thanks so much for coming to meet us today. And I'm going to kick off the questions to you, Dame Melanie. In your report on the review of public service media, you said the current challenges facing PSBs are that there are risks being less PSM content in the future. What can Ofcom do? What levers has Ofcom got to help PSBs cope with these financial challenges that they're facing?
Well, as we said, and as you've correctly cited from our report in December, which was a backward look at the system, we've got a twin challenge for the PSBs. And one is actually the audiences are increasingly fragmented, so it's partly about how do they get their product seen and enjoyed and appreciated, and then very related to that is how do the business models sustain when they've not got the same audiences. So two things really. What are we doing? First, we're implementing the Media Act. There's a lot in the Act which will help, and particularly prominence on connected and smart TVs. But we're not resting on that because we think the pace of change is too fast and we risk losing things if we don't keep looking at the future. So before summer recess, we'll be publishing a report that pulls together the results of very extensive consultation across the industry, across the nations, on things that could make a difference in this next phase. And I can say a bit more about that if you like, but fundamentally that will be something we publish in about 2 months' time.
Is there anything more that you'd like to do, but that you'd need further powers to be able to do?
Well, I think there are questions around prominence, which, to my first problem I cited, actually can audiences find public service content these days, given the number of platforms that we're all engaging with? So the Media Act does something about that for smart TVs, connected TVs. But it doesn't tackle prominence on YouTube, for example, which is increasingly where the viewing hours are being spent in the home, particularly amongst your younger audiences. It doesn't deal with social media. So there's a question around that. And there are various other things that I think one could look at. There's nothing straightforward and there's going to be no silver bullet, but the government are quite keen for us to do this work. And I think they'll be listening and interested to hear what we say.
So in your previous report, which was called Small Screen, Big Debate, effectively it was your findings from that which led to the Media Act. Have you got similar ambitions for your current review? Do you want some common legislation to grow out of it?
Well, I think what we want is for a good and forward-looking debate about this. And I think the government, are quite keen for us to do this work to prompt that debate. And then if they decide to legislate, that's obviously very much a question for them and a question for Parliament. But as I said, none of these questions are easy. I mean, how do you ensure prominence on social media, for example? It's actually quite hard when you've got an algorithm that's driving people's feeds. On a smart TV, it's much more straightforward. It can be designed by the person who's responsible for that piece of technology. So it isn't straightforward, any of this. And we wouldn't be saying, that the government must definitely take forward things very, very quickly here. I think a lot of these are going to need more data and more consideration to take through.
Thank you. And then another rumour that keeps coming back is that ITV might be taken over by another media organisation, so most recently by Banerjee, but before that there was the Abu Dhabi-backed group Redbird IMI. Are these rumours that concern you?
Well, look, it's our role as the regulator to carry out our job, which is to make sure that the regulatory regime that supports ITV and the other PSBs in delivering what they do deliver. And our report in December was really clear that the PSBs continue to deliver fantastic content for the viewing and listening public. Our job is to make sure that that system of quotas, of prominence and so on works, and to get on with the Media Act. But it's not our job to run companies or to decide who owns what. I mean, there may be issues sometimes around public interest tests where the Secretary of State can engage us, as you know. But, you know, we're very clear as the regulator that commercial decisions are for the boards and shareholders of those companies and not for us.
So even if there was a prospect that ITV was going to be subject to a takeover from an overseas investor like Redbird, you still wouldn't have necessarily a role in that?
Well, we might have a role, whether to be a decision by the Secretary of State to ask us for advice and to launch a public interest test process. That would very much depend, though, on the circumstances. But our ongoing role would be to make sure that that licence, and ITV has just signed up to another 10-year licence, to make sure that those conditions are fulfilled.
Would that be something that concerned you if one of our PSBs was owned by an overseas company?
Might be worth...
Do you want to come in, Michael?
It might be worth adding a bit of context here. Channel 5, which is a PSB, is owned by an American company. And the...
Does that concern you?
Channel 5 is doing extremely well under its ownership, doing quite a bit better than it used to. The Redbird example is peculiar because it was a sovereign wealth fund from the Middle East who are the main investors, which is very close to government, so that's a specific issue in that case.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to both of you. Ofcom's response to the Prime Minister's letter asking regulators for examples of what you would do to enhance economic growth included implementing the Media Act. How is the Media Act going to stimulate economic growth, if I can ask both of you?
Well, I think the challenges faced by the commercial sector of public service broadcasting are considerable. The flow of advertising, the big pot of advertising money that's moving online, the fragmentation that Melanie has mentioned of the audience. But the response from the public service, the PSBs in the commercial sector to the Media Act has been one of great relief. They've been waiting for the prominence rules to be put in place, and so I think there's a general sense that this will help. It's not the complete answer to the long-term sustainability, but it's a huge assistance to them presently.
And if I can add, we do believe at Ofcom that growth and regulation can go hand in hand, and it's our job to make that the case as far as possible. I think broadcasting regulation is a really interesting example of one where, for decades now, the government, through regulation, has been able to secure public service benefits in the form of regional news, regional production quotas and so on, off the back of a commercial balance sheet. And that trade has worked. It's worked for both parties. But as the market position of our traditional PSBs has eroded over time with competition coming in, which is a good thing in many ways, the government and the regulator constantly need to be looking at what is doable and what's achievable and what's the real priority. And so that's what the Media Act does. It reduces some regulations in some areas. It's very clear about them remaining in other areas, including quotas, locally gathered news from radio. And we're implementing that and doing so as fast as we can. It's complex, but it's an important job for Ofcom and a big priority for us this year.
I might just add a sentence, if I may, that under the licensing regime for broadcasters, we've been very adept at and flexible in updating licenses to meet the needs of audiences. You know, a lot of legacy conditions in licenses have been surpassed by the move of audiences to online and the different ways that they consume media today. And I think we've been pretty quick at amending licenses and updating them to meet what we know the way the audience is moving.
Thank you. If I could ask you, Lord Grade, in your pre-appointment hearing, you said part of the reason you applied for the chair of Ofcom was to ensure continued investment and growth in our internationally successful creative industries. Where do you see potential for that growth for the PSBs and the creative industries in general?
Well, that will be the subject of our public service media review, which we're in the foothills of doing. We'll be taking opinions from across all the stakeholders. The great success story of the last 10 or 20 years in the UK sectors has been the growth of the creative industries, and there can be little doubt that the engine of that growth are the skills and the investment that the PSBs, including the BBC, put into British content for British audiences. That pot of money, I suspect, is challenged at the moment, and we need to look hard at the reasons for that and look at what the different options might be for ensuring that we can continue to meet the audience's demand for programmes of all kinds that are made by British producers for British audiences, wherever they may be in the four nations.
And if I could ask you both, how is Ofcom approaching the subject of artificial intelligence, given the current climate where the debate about AI and creative industries is framed around copyright?
Yeah. I think there's two sides to that. On the copyright debate, I mean, clearly copyright is central to any part of the creative industry. It's going way beyond Ofcom sectors. That very much is something for the government. We're not involved in the work that they're doing there, but we absolutely see how central it is to the future ability to earn revenues from creative content. On AI, all of Ofcom's sectors are being disrupted, transformed by AI, as is most of the economy, to be honest. So whether that's the opportunities in TV production to, translate into multiple languages, to produce fantastic new effects, but also some of the risks of fake content, really offensive content, some of the questions around ownership as well, of course. Most of the time what you're looking at is a balance of risks and opportunities. And as a regulator, what we're trying to do is find our way through that, work out whether our regulation needs to adapt. But most of the time, I think this is for commercial companies to be leaning in as far as they can and managing to serve audiences in the ways that they now expect to be served, which is increasingly through digital channels and through, people really enjoy, engaging with services that feed them content in ways that's very personalised to them, which of course is absolutely driven by AI.
Would you like to add something?
No, I'm happy with the answer.
All right, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Tom?
Thank you. You spoke earlier a little about implementing the Media Act, and I'd like to ask a little about prominence, which is crucial for the longevity and success of our world-leading public service broadcasters. So to Dame Melanie first, what is left to do before the prominence provisions in the Media Act are implemented to secure the benefits as quickly as possible?
The prominence changes, I think, are at the heart of the Media Act. They're probably the most important thing in terms of securing the role of the PSBs for the future. And we have concluded the first part of the work, which is to consult on how we would designate PSB players and how we'll advise the Secretary of State to designate the smart TVs and so on. The next stage then is to do those designations. We are expecting that work will be done sometime in the autumn. And then once that's done, and we know who the companies are on both sides, we can then launch the consultation on the rules. And that's really when you get into the meat and drink of this. So how should prominence work on the screen, and it's prominence of the player, like ITVX, whatever, but it's also prominence of the content, where content's being fed through an algorithm. And then also, what's the terms of trade? What's fair? How should advertising revenues, data be shared? What's a sensible contract? Recognising that a lot of the companies involved, Amazon and so on, are very, very, very large, and we need to make sure that our companies are able to strike a fair deal. That's really what's going on here. So we should be finished by the summer of next year. And that's because those steps have to be sequential, which does make it a bit protracted, but we are moving as fast as we can.
And according to the roadmap for implementation, I think the Secretary of State was previously expected to designate the TV platforms considered to be in scope of the prominence regime by July to September this year. Do you think we're still on track for that?
I think it might be a little later. I think it might be more like the autumn of this year, but by Christmas, I would hope. Some of the work has just, proved to be more complicated on our side. And when we set out our roadmap in February last year, of course, none of us had any idea quite when the general election would fall. The new government's actually moved pretty fast to get on top of this, but inevitably they had to do some thinking and a little bit of work to be sure that they wanted to progress all of this in the way that had previously been planned.
Thank you. Lord Grade, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, it's fine, thank you.
And then perhaps to you, Lord Grade, you've in previous roles been on the other side of the fence as the chair of BBC and ITV. If you were in their position, would you be arguing for significant prominence rather than appropriate prominence?
No, I think it is what it is. Nobody ever gets what they ask for. There's always a compromise along the way somewhere. But I think that the noises, the reaction we've had from the PSBs has been a sigh of great relief that this legislation now exists. And I think they take great comfort from it.
They've previously obviously discussed wanting significant prominence rather than appropriate prominence. In your engagement, perhaps this might be for either of you, with them throughout this process since the passage of the Act, has appropriate prominence, has the definition of that and the movement of regulation in that direction been to their liking? Does it seem closer to what they perhaps wanted from significant, or have you heard reservations from them?
To be honest, the main thing we hear from all of them, and it does come up in every meeting, is please get on with it. And, you're going to need to be tough in enforcing whatever code we set in place. It's a commercial code with, important but still small by global comparisons, British companies, even the BBC, up against some of the big global tech giants. So Ofcom's role as the backstop on that, they are very clear that they're going to want us to be, really tough in enforcing that when they think we need to. And of course we will do that in a way that's fair. So that's mainly how the conversation goes. But it is a big priority for them for reasons we actually understand and indeed share.
I'm sure there'll be some early case law which will produce rounds of applause and tears on one side or on one side and the other. So I think the tools are there to make sure that we're able to implement the Act in the way in which it was designed.
Thanks, Tom. And so on that implementation, what progress have you made on implementing the radio selection services on smart speakers? We've got a lot of consultations coming out actually in June, and what we're going to do at that point is write. We thought it might be helpful for you if we wrote to you with an update on the implementation timescales, because a few things have slipped. I'll be honest about that for a variety of reasons, as I was saying earlier. And we want, although we've been updating on our website, what we thought might help is if we just write and explain it to you with a proper tracker attached. So we will do that. I can find out exactly where we are on the radio side and come back to you on that in a moment, if that's okay. Yep. Fine. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you. Melanie, you already mentioned the importance of YouTube for news consumption and social media, and just now you were talking about the need to consider algorithmic recommendations when you're talking about prominence of individual pieces of content rather than entire channels or platforms on TV devices. Particularly when we talk about young people, I mean, that prominence of YouTube and social is that much greater, and looking up some of the big providers of news, I have to look them up again, I'm afraid, on these channels like TLDR on YouTube or News Daddy on TikTok. I mean, this is a world that most politicians, regulators, it's not a world they inhabit. Perhaps it's a question to put to you, Lord Grade. I just wonder if we might be slightly fighting the last war here, and if you can't, perhaps you just can't really have a serious conversation about news prominence or content prominence, including news. News happens to be something we worry about more than other things, without considering social media, online platforms for young people.
I think the first thing that it's incumbent on everybody represented here and ourselves to ensure that the most used source of news, the PSBs, namely the BBC, ITN and so on, that they are sustainable for the long term, because they have the impact that these fragmented small channels don't have. They don't have that impact. That's not to say that they don't have some influence with some younger audiences, but in the end, I think what we can do is to ensure the long-term sustainability of fair, impartial and accurate news where it matters most. The pillars of news are the PSBs. That's where most people, I mean, when the COVID crisis hit, you know, the numbers for BBC News and ITN and so on went through the roof. That's where people turn for trusted news. So I think the emphasis must be, rather than chasing around the long tail, I think we've got to expend the effort maintaining the long-term sustainability of the PSB news channels. I include Sky, of course. I should have mentioned Sky.
But you can be sustained and still unseen.
Yes.
Especially by younger audience. I wasn't suggesting, as you say, chasing the long tail. But I mean, for those, I think it's probably everybody here who thinks there's a particular value to the public sector broadcasters. They aren't being seen in the volumes that you would. I mean, I think you would want to sort of 16 to 24 age groups. And my question really was, if you're talking about prominence, can you really do prominence effectively if you're not doing YouTube and TikTok and Instagram?
I think it's pretty difficult to do prominence properly unless you're also thinking about the platforms that young people are on. There are some, positive statistics out there, though. I mean, half of 16 to 24s who are on YouTube say that they have seen public service broadcaster content in the past year. But I think one of the things that is a real problem here is that we just do not have
half in the last year.
In the last year, exactly. And how much, we don't know. But I'm just saying they have noticed it, and the PSBs are getting onto those platforms increasingly. Yes. But we know at Ofcom from the research we've done that people generally read the first couple of things that come up in their feed, and after that they don't. And so that choice that the algorithm is making, which is usually a bit of a black box, and of course one of the reasons why this is so complicated is that every social media algorithm is different, but that black box algorithm is highly influential in what you read, and that's true for adults as well as for children. So I think we do have to look at this. I think the issues are slightly different for YouTube, where there are partnerships with broadcasters that you could see being part of the picture. I think on social media, it's usually short form content. It's a slightly different kind of problem. It's more about the balance of what the algorithm is feeding you.
Thank you.
Does that mean that in your review you're likely to recommend that prominence, that PSBs are given prominence in the video sharing platforms?
I think we believe that you can't really look at this for the future without that being a really central thing that we have to consider. Sorry, I'm giving you slightly vague words here.
We take that as a yes. So therefore, do Ofcom have the existing powers to do that? Or would you need a new Media Act to make that happen?
We don't have any powers to do that at the moment, either under the Online Safety Act or the Media Act.
And I think previously you've asked for platforms to be more transparent about their algorithms. Is your review's likely to recommend that again?
That is part of it, yes. And also transparency about what people are watching. So, for example, we know that there is lots of really great children's content from the BBC on YouTube, but we don't know how much of it's being watched. We don't have that Barb-style data set for even for YouTube. And I think that's something the industry have been working on for a while, but I think part of this is also about what the industry needs to do. And I think that's a big priority because we are all running a bit blind on this at the moment. We know that kids are on YouTube, but we don't really know what they're watching.
No. So how much traction have you had with the tech companies on this issue, on the issue of data, but also algorithms? It's their most prized possession, right? The algorithm. So how much traction have you had with them on it?
Well, I think at the moment there's industry effort going into this, but we would like to see it accelerate. And we're not driving that engagement at the moment, but I'm hoping that our review in the summer will be a moment for everyone to just kind of slightly maybe shift focus a bit on this and start to think about what all the different players might be able to do to push this further. Because, for YouTube, for example, there's a very positive collaboration for them already with the PSBs in many respects. But could it go further? And if the government's interested in taking forward any of the ideas around prominence further, maybe that could actually bring a slightly different conversation across the industry, quite quickly perhaps. I don't know.
So keeping in mind that you don't want to say anything definitive ahead of the review this summer, is it likely that you could potentially call for more regulation to bring that forward as part of the review?
I think it's always a balance. We're a regulator. Will we want to call for something, or will we just want to point out the problem, the options, how some of the options actually really, could be very effective? I'm sorry if I'm being a little bit weasel words there. It's not for us to advocate what our rules should be in the future, I don't think. I don't think it's for us to say what Parliament and government should or shouldn't do. But what we will do is set out as clearly as we can the scale of the problem and the solutions that could really help to tackle it.
Okay.
This was brought home to me the other day in a presentation I got from the team at Ofcom that 80% of homes now have smart TVs, which I was staggered by that number.
Yes, but also a lot of homes are using their smart TVs to access YouTube and other video sharing platforms.
But I was amazed by that number.
Yeah, this is the modern world. Liz, did you have anything to add there? Okay, thank you very much. In that case, we will move on to radio. Should we talk about radio? I think that's me again, isn't it? Sorry, everybody. I wondered, Melanie, how you'd respond to the BBC chair who said that Ofcom's regulatory processes are too slow and PSBs need to be able to move with greater agility, flexibility and pace. That's what he said.
Yes, well, it's worth remembering why we do scrutinise some of the BBC's new channels and programmes, and it's because although they are competing against big global companies, in the domestic market, particularly on radio, they are still very dominant. And it's really important that they don't stifle innovation and just chase new channels where one of their competitors has come up with something and then they just follow and sort of wipe them out far too quickly, and that's just a serious problem for innovation and growth across the industry. So that's why the rules are there. That's why Ofcom does what we do. We always seek to do it as quickly as we can. We actually have a 7.5-month deadline for our processes, which we've always met. We are trying to streamline them. We've actually consulted on that to reduce the number of processes we have to run, but also to reduce the arms and legs of the process so it's a bit quicker. And the moment the government and the BBC have finalised the framework agreement as part of the midterm review, we will move that forward.
What about this public interest test? He said, when we asked him for an example, he gave the example of asking you to speed up the public interest test. Have you considered that?
Yes, that's the process that I was referring to, where we have a 7.5-month deadline, which we do always meet, and we would like to streamline that. At the moment there are 2 consultations as part of each one, and we'd like to reduce that to 1, and we'd also like to reduce the number of cases that we have to look at. We just need the BBC and the government to finalise the framework agreement, and then we're ready to go.
Did we have an answer on the radio selection services and smart speakers yet?
I can certainly give you a little bit more on that. We've, again, as for prominence on TV, we've consulted on our principles and methods. So the next stage is the designation, and then we will consult on the codes of practice. And again, I think the deadline for that we're currently working to is to have all of this done by next summer. The bits of the Media Act that are new, like prominence and voice assistance, the deadline is next summer. Right. The bits where it's about updating the current regime, like PSB quotas, listed events, the deadline is the end of this calendar year. That's what we're working to.
The deadline to conclude the consultation, or the deadline to implement?
To finalise and for us to have finalised all the rules. It's our own deadline that we're now working to, which we're going to be pushing ourselves pretty hard on now.
And when will we start to see a difference?
Well, I mean, to some extent, when you start to consult on the ideas, you immediately have an impact on the market. So, I would hope that you'd see some of that ahead of time. I think on radio, and particularly voice assistants, to be fair, there are quite a lot of questions here about how this works and exactly what it is that the user experience needs to be to ensure prominence when you're asking a question of a voice assistant. So there is quite a bit of work to do there, and I don't think we should expect to see an enormous change before the rules are finalised next summer, because we've got to engage with the industry quite a bit about what they think would be the right kind of prominence.
Okay, so next summer we're working towards.
Yes.
Thank you.
Quite often our processes, the timing of our process is dictated by the speed of response from the interested parties. They ask for delays or they ask for extensions and so on, which in fairness we most often are as helpful as we can be within limits, but the speed of our process is quite often delayed by the speed of response or the latent responses that we get from
The quicker
reporters.
people respond, the quicker the implementation will take place.
Indeed, and
Okay.
I have to say, as a former chairman of the BBC, I've never seen the BBC process as being an exemplar of speed and agility, I would have to say.
Okay. Well, talking to the BBC, they've proposed 4 new national radio stations on DAB, which are very similar to commercial stations, and which commercial stations are very worried about. I know you've said that your provisional view is that the Radio 2 service should be blocked, but there are 3 others that are set to go ahead at the moment. One is the Radio 1 Dance, the Radio 1 Anthems, and the Radio 3 Unwind. Obviously, commercial radio concerned about the impact of this and the absence of any news content on these this offer. Is this something that Ofcom is likely to have a view on? Is it something that you're likely to step in on?
Well, as you say, we've said, probably no to one and, yes to the others. And we've weighed up all those issues, where is there a commercial service that's just already providing this? Where actually is the BBC right that they're filling an important gap in the market and using their public service remit and funding to do so? So we weigh all that up and do so as quickly as we can, recognising that, as the chair of the BBC has said, life moves on and we have to get these processes as smart as we can, and so do they.
I'd like you to recommend the 3 others, but will there be a requirement for them to have news bulletins, or is that not going to be part of it?
It's not what's proposed.
I don't think it's what's proposed.
Not what's proposed, no.
Very good. Let's move on to Zoe.
Thank you. So good afternoon. I wanted to get started on talking about the Online Safety Act, and one which I wanted to particularly touch on because it's been alerted to me through a really sad case in my own constituency around access to pro-suicide content online through forums and websites. And I know in April you started your first investigation into one of these pro-suicide forums. I just wondered if you had a particular timeline that you work to with these sorts of investigations, and then more widely, a bit of an overview on the work you're doing to tackle this kind of content and get it taken off out of the realm of people being able to access it, because it really is impacting a worrying number of lives.
Yeah. Yes, there is a particular website, and I think none of us like to give it its name because we don't want to help it to reach its audience, but it's illegal content, a lot of this. It's advocating and assisting and giving people the means to take their own lives, and that's not, that's just simply not legal. It falls squarely against the illegal harms parts of the Online Safety Act. So, as you say, this is our first investigation against a platform, almost immediately after the duties came into force. So what will happen next is that this is where, as Michael was saying, it can get quite difficult for us to predict timelines, I'll be honest with you, because we need to give the other side a chance to respond, and then we need to work out, what and when we will then do to push things further forward. Ultimately, as you know, we have pretty stringent fines that we can levy, but we can also seek through the courts a business disruption order against a platform that we just feel is simply not listening to what we are saying and what the Act says, particularly where the level of harm warrants that. But that's a test that we would expect the court to be very, very, very careful in judging, because of the implications for freedom of expression as well, which just have to be part of the conversation, even if that sometimes feels very, very difficult in cases like this. And I would just add that that particular forum has been the subject of a number of coroners' requests of Ofcom, a number of prevention of future death reports, so it's very much at the centre of our thinking and of the coroners' courts as well.
Thank you. And so then sort of widening it out to illegal and harmful content across the board, what progress are you making in terms of ensuring platforms have the processes to address this type of content?
Well, where content is illegal, the codes are now finished. Parliament has approved them. They went live on the 16th of March. And so we expect all of those companies now to be implementing, if they need to, the provisions of the codes. The first step that they had to take was to do a risk assessment, and we asked 60 companies for their risk assessment within a fortnight of that deadline of the 16th of March, and we've been interrogating those assessments over the last few weeks and having some conversations with companies where we think that there are issues. And we've been doing the same when it comes to the need for age assurance for pornography sites, for example, and there we are, poised to be taking enforcement action fairly soon against a couple of companies that we are concerned about. So we're on the way on this in doing what the Act requires of us, which is to assess the risk assessments, assess the measures, and then start to take action if we think we need to. And the children's codes, which we published and finalised a fortnight ago now, they are 6 months behind that timescale, but it's exactly the same process.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Sorry, it's not 6 months, it's 4 months behind.
Right, thank you. And obviously this is a really challenging sphere to be working in. You are against tech firms who have a lot of resources. Do you feel you have the resources that you need to address these issues?
I think if I may give you a breather. I think we do. The resources, the implementation is the thing, but it's the Act which gives us the roadmap to make sure that we can, over time, reduce harm. And all the strength comes from that. I think we are, we were well prepared. Government of the day enabled us, gave us an investment which enabled us to tool up well ahead so that when the bill became an act, received royal assent, we were ready to go. We had the right people in place. And I have to say, one of the first things I did when I arrived at Ofcom, and which the board did, was really to look at our recruitment in that area. And I think the board is extremely comfortable that we've recruited extremely well, both from the public sector, from NGOs, from tech companies themselves who've been there and done it. It's the quality of the resources that we've been able to recruit, I think, which will stand us in good stead going forward.
And do you think that's still the case given the evolving nature of the online space? Do you have that expertise that is going to continue to evolve as the online space continues to evolve?
I hope so. Not everybody can anticipate what somebody in a garage in Sunderland is going to come up with that's going to transform the landscape. But we do a lot of horizon scanning at Ofcom in our policy team, and they're looking all the time. And we've got some superb brains who know this stuff inside out, who are looking all the time for what may be the next thing, what's coming. But the important thing for now is to absolutely implement the Act in the way that Parliament has handed down to us. But I'm confident, going back to your original question, we've got the right result. We could always do with more, but that's a simple answer. The question is the quality of the people that we recruited, and I'd be very comfortable on that front.
I think I would just add that there's no question there's plenty of risk around your question. So whether that's because events will keep moving, technology will keep adapting, we're mitigating that particular risk by building as strong partnerships as we can globally, and with other regulators in the UK, so that there's as many heads as possible applied to these things, particularly around horizon scanning. It's one of the most fruitful areas of cross-regulatory cooperation, in fact. But the other risk is simply that we just don't know at this stage exactly how the industry is going to respond. And if we end up with some really big court cases, then that could be quite expensive. But what we've got with the government is a good arrangement, certainly around legal costs. And I feel that we have the right sort of partnership to be able to say, this is now something where we're going to need to put more resource into Ofcom, because everybody wants us to get on with this Act. I've got absolutely no questions at all about the government's commitment for us to want to do that. In fact, they keep asking us to, if anything, do even more and even faster. So if we end up with resource issues, then that's a good conversation that I would hope to be able to have.
I would just add, if I may, there's an international dimension to this. The tech companies themselves are dealing with this in so many territories, both at the European Union and Australia. All over the world, they're having to deal with the onset of regulation. And Melanie's been in the forefront of international dialogue with other regulators and governments around the place to ensure best practice of shared, this is our problem, have you solved it, and so on. That's a very, very important part of Melanie's role in this, if I may say so.
Thank you. And are you getting that quality of relationship with platforms that you would like to enable you to move forward with these issues?
Yet to be tested, let's put it that way. But we have good dialogue. We've had good dialogue with the major tech companies for the last 2-3 years, really. But it's not yet been tested. And the test, I've always thought the test is the public policy people and the lawyers are wonderful. They really engage. They want to understand it. Will that translate to the people who design the platforms and the products that they're selling? That's the real test. And we shall see.
Thank you.
That dialogue changed with the US big tech companies over the last 6 months?
Not to my knowledge, but Melanie may have a more up-to-date.
No, not really to mine either. We're dealing with people who understand the obligations of the Online Safety Act, and as Michael says, we shall see, what they deliver, but we haven't particularly detected any change in the last few months.
Thank you. Can I ask a little bit about the demarcation between Ofcom and the ICO, which I think sometimes confuses people a little bit, and very understandably. So last week you had the children's codes published. But it's the ICO that produces the age-appropriate design code. On age checking in particular, could you say a word about whose responsibility it is to make sure that if there is a nominal minimum age to be on social media, that is the general practice?
Specifically on minimum ages, there is at the moment no requirement in the Online Safety Act for companies to either have a minimum age or to enforce it with highly effective age assurance. So they have to enforce it consistently, but the law doesn't say that has to be effective or highly effective at the moment. So that's just not in the Online Safety Act. Now, we've been concerned about that. And so what we've done as part of our children's code is to say that any company that doesn't have highly effective age assurance at its minimum age, so the same test as they need at 18, if they don't have that at their minimum age, then they should assume they have younger children on their platform and design it accordingly. And we think that is a very strong incentive for them to properly police that minimum age. And the technology is available. It's much better than it was even a year ago for them to be able to do that. So although it's not explicit in the Online Safety Act, we think, using the tools we've got through the Act to push it pretty hard. And there would be nothing to stop a requirement being introduced in the Act at a later date. So it could be done through the Online Safety Act. Meanwhile, the Information Commissioner owns obviously the data protection rules, and that means that age 13 is the age of consent, before which, so younger than that, children need the consent of their parents. A platform needs the consent of parents to be able to use children's data. So those rules, again, I think the Information Commissioner has pushed that through the age-appropriate design code quite hard to try to ensure that if a platform says it's got a minimum age of 13, then it actually does something about it. And we, think there's quite a long way to go on age assurance, both at 18 and 13 across the industry. The tick box, how old are you? That is not any form of assurance whatsoever. We've been very clear about that.
So I think that point you made about your requirement that platforms assume that if they can't demonstrate how old people are, then they should assume they have younger people on their platform. I think that principle is also hardwired into the age-appropriate design code, which has been around since 2021, I think. And I'm not sure many people really believe it has that effect in real life. I think also many people believe that the Online Safety Act does say that you have to, if you have a minimum age, you have to enforce it. I know there's this distinction, which you just mentioned, between consistent application and effective application. I mean, I think many people read the common English usage of the word consistent application to sort of imply that it's also effective. But I think you're saying that, Ofcom's reading of the Act and you read it more than most, but your understanding is that, no, it doesn't have to be effective. As long as you're doing it equally badly with everybody, that would be compliant.
We think that's the risk.
It certainly is. But I think you're also saying that either Ofcom or the ICO, but Ofcom would require additional legislation to do it, either Ofcom or the ICO could enforce there being an effective age threshold at age 13, if that's what platforms were saying was the case. But ICO could do it instead of Ofcom, is that correct?
Yes, I'm saying that it could, in theory, be done under the Online Safety Act. It could be a requirement in the law, and then we would be able to enforce against that. And the technology is much better than it was a few years ago, and so the means to do this are there, we believe. It's been the case up until now that the technology's been getting there at aged 18, but not so good at the younger age ranges. That's improving all the time now. But we're not, you know, I wouldn't want there to be a council of despair on this. I think between us, the pincer movement of the ICO and Ofcom's actions in this area are quite significant around minimum ages. Of course, the top priority of the Act is highly effective age assurance at aged 18 to screen out pornography, suicide and self-harm material and so on from all under 18s. So that's very clear and a top priority for 2025. But we are going to be pushing hard for companies that we believe are promising parents that they have a minimum age and then not actually doing anything to enforce it. It's important.
I totally agree. I think the Children's Code is a very important step forward. But there are also hundreds of thousands of children under the age of 13 accessing a service which is nominally meant to be for children aged 13 or above. And also hundreds of thousands of children who are over 13, but because of the age they were at the moment they signed up, appear to be 16 or 17 or even 18 and above, and will be being served different types of content.
I agree.
It's
a big problem.
On other matters to do with that demarcation between ICO and Ofcom, which of you is more responsible for thinking about the extent to which algorithmic recommendation systems create echo chambers?
Well, insofar as it's an echo chamber for a teenager around depressive content, suicide content, that's core Ofcom business. It's a central part of the codes that those...
Clear, I didn't only mean for children, but obviously that's a very important part.
Just to answer that question, it's central to the codes that those feeds become safer and that intensity of content, that some content's screened out altogether, but that they don't get pushed. Children don't get pushed that very, very intense and harmful content. When it comes to adults then, if you particularly want to focus on that, I mean, the illegal harms codes are really more about whether content is there at all rather than the echo chamber question. So they have to have, companies will have to have systems and processes to take down content when they find it, and good content moderation, well-resourced content moderation and so on to make sure that they do that if it's illegal. I don't think the echo chamber question is particularly catered for in those codes. And mis and disinformation and not harm.
I want to come specifically. I know. I want to specifically come on to mis and disinformation in a moment. But just to be clear, so unless the content is itself illegal and covered by your provisions on illegal content, howsoever it gets served up to the individual, the work, as if you like, of the algorithm is not something which is your part of your concern. I don't mean that in a bad way, but part of your concern, and neither is it part of the ICO's concern.
The algorithm is central to the illegal harms codes, but it's partly also about preventing content as well and using things like CSAM hash matching technologies, etc. And certainly when it comes to our women and girls guidance, harassment and bullying and the way the algorithms can amplify that's very much central to that picture.
Yes, but they would come under your codes even if they were only served up once and no algorithm was involved.
Yes. I mean, bullying and harassment is very much about scale, so
Right.
it's a slightly different. Certainly, I think it would be more relevant if whether you're calling that an echo chamber or just a pile-on. It's a slightly different problem. And I think I was acknowledging that I don't think that the echo chamber question is particularly catered for under those codes, but it's possible that when I get back to the office, and one of my colleagues will say, "You forgot about this." So if we've got anything to add, we're happy to do so.
And is either regulator looking similarly at a systemic level at the role of programmatic advertising and or creator funds in the type of material that is served up to people?
We're not looking specifically at measures that would tackle the business model issues. The Digital Markets Unit may well look at some of this because of the dominance, as we've seen this morning, reported half of UK advertising revenue goes to Meta and Google. There's sort of big competition issues there. We've certainly identified that the business models is an important factor for risk assessments, which are central to the Act. So if you've got an attention-driven, advertising-based business model, then you need to pay more attention to the role of those algorithms in promulgating harmful content, either illegal or harmful to children. So it's a relevant factor.
Section 152 of the Act does require Ofcom to establish and maintain an advisory committee on disinformation and misinformation to publish a report within 18 months of being established. I think they have their first meeting next week on Friday. What will they cover?
I want to say something about this, Michael, because the board actually approved
Yes, I think
committee only recently.
It is an advisory board. It's a very there are people from very good different disciplines who will inform that, and they will be looking to commission research to help us prioritise our resources in the right way to problems that they see coming up or that they've noticed. It will be a very important resource for us as we go through. The key thing was, again, the recruitment of the panel itself, which we're very pleased about, and Lord Allen who is now a non-exec who comes from that background, is chairing that on behalf of the board.
I think you can require under Section 77 information about disinformation from platforms. And I think then you publish that in the form of these transparency reports. I mean, how will that manifest? Will you, for example, be able to report on the number of automated accounts or the amounts of inauthentic activity on platforms because they have had to report that to you? And will you then therefore be able to effectively expose that then to the consuming public?
I think this is a matter
This
for
is
the
to be determined, I think.
Yeah.
Are you talking there about the transparency requirements on categorised platforms?
Yeah. So this is as I understand it. So I think you have two things in the Act on mis and disinformation. So you have the duty to promote media literacy to counter mis and disinformation, but also the ability to require information of platforms on mis and dis, and I presume on the prevalence of mis and disinformation and what they are doing in order to counter it. And I think, as I've understood it, the transparency reports are the vehicle through which you will do that. I think, as my understanding is, the advisory board, I think, is something different. I think they sort of advise that whole process, but the reporting comes through kind of Ofcom itself.
Yes, exactly right.
Is my understanding.
Yes, I think that's right.
Perhaps you could follow up with the committee just with a bit more on what we sort of expect to be in the transparency reports, and therefore how they will be a useful tool for the public. And my final question, the Chairman will be pleased to hear me say, is I think this is another area where platforms will have their own terms and conditions, and when, on my understanding of the Act, you as the regulator can hold platforms to account for doing what they have said they will do, their contract with the customer. What can you do if it turns out that a platform, and by the way a number of them do, say we don't tolerate interference. We don't tolerate very low quality, divisive and untrue information. And then they're doing that. What can you as the regulator do about it?
Well, I mean, ultimately we can investigate that if we think that's a priority, given the overall implementation of the Act. That's something that we could do. But do go back to mis and disinformation are not listed as harms that platforms do need to counter in the Act. That was a hotly debated issue, of course, in Parliament a couple of years ago. We do think the media literacy requirements are quite important. So in the early autumn, we'll be coming back to finalise the recommendations to the industry on what we think good platform design looks like to support the public in being more media literate, which isn't a phrase I terribly like, by the way, but we know what we're talking about, I hope. And so we're definitely pushing that one forward. We've got a number of platforms have already signed up to the draft code that we've already published there, but we don't have an ability to enforce it or require it of the industry.
Thank you.
Thank you. So when the Online Safety Act was being hammered out here in Parliament, what ministers used to keep saying is that one of the fundamental thrusts of the bill would be to ensure that online content providers, online platforms are doing what they say they're doing when it comes to implementing their own terms and conditions, basically doing what it says on the tin. To what extent do you feel that the legislation that you've now got to work with equips you to do that?
Well, as you say, it's there. I think it's a duty just for the categorised platforms. So what we've got to do there is finalise the categorisation register and identify what those platforms are, and then we will be consulting on what the codes should look like for the duties that those platforms then have to carry out. So it's a later piece of work for us. The priority that we were given by Parliament is to get the illegal harms and protection of children bits of the Act moving first, which we are now doing. We're now into enforcement in those areas. This is still earlier on, and we're going to be consulting on the full detail of those codes early next year on current timescales, although we want to get the transparency notices moving sooner than that, ideally before the summer break.
You're confident that you've got the equipment at your disposal with in terms of legislation, you've got the legislative equipment at your disposal to be able to deliver on, what ministers
we've certainly got the ability to deliver on what's in the Act, yes. I mean, everyone can debate whether it goes far enough, but we've got the ability to, take those duties and write a code in consultation with the industry and then hold the industry to account for it.
I mean, the key question is, do you think it does that? Do your lawyers think the Online Safety Act does enable you to hold platforms to account for what is in their terms and conditions, in this case specifically on mis and disinformation?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, because successive ministers have, across all different government departments, have always, rightly or wrongly, pitched the Online Safety Act as the silver bullet when it comes to dealing with every single harm that's out there in the online world. I think we all know that that's not what it's going to deliver, but we just sort of, I guess, want some reassurance from you that it will give you the powers that you need to take down, the key illegal and harmful to children content that we've been told.
Illegal and harmful to children content, absolutely. Those are statutory codes, they're harms listed in the Act. We're really clear about that. We're already enforcing against those measures. The requirement for categorised services to implement their own terms and conditions, yes, we've got the ability to scrutinise and enforce against that, but there's nothing to stop a platform from changing their terms and conditions in response. So that's the difference, because there's no requirement of them in the Act to have policies on those issues. There are some other things they do need. There are some foreign communication interference in election offences and so on. So the malicious communications, and to be clear, that after the Southport riots last summer, there was plenty that the industry could have done better in terms of taking down clearly illegal content that incited violence and so on, that some people were convicted for, and the platforms didn't take down. So we've already published a report on that. And we're clear that the Online Safety Act does have quite a lot of traction on some of those issues.
Okay. Right. Happy? Thank you. Rupa.
Thanks, and hello both. Dame Melanie, looking through your previous appearances at this committee, there was one December the 17th, 2020, that spawned the headline, Ofcom boss criticises BBC's platforming of anti-trans groups. I just wondered if the judgment the other day on the Equality Act by the Supreme Court sort of changes that, because I think at the time it was, the thinking was that trans rights views should not be challenged with gender critical ones. Does this change anything?
I think there was quite a bit of confusion at the time around that, but to be clear, Ofcom did not and does not give guidance to TV or radio companies about how they should handle questions of gender identity, sex-based rights and so on. So the latest Supreme Court judgment obviously is relevant, and it may affect the way that we would approach any individual assessment of a complaint, but it was never something that we ever gave guidance on, and it certainly isn't now either.
Okay, yeah, because there may be trans people fearing discrimination and harm, and there may be people thinking that there should be equal space given to the anti-trans people. So, yeah, just thought that was...
I would just add to
yes.
that, if I may. Since the ruling, I would be confident, without having intimate knowledge, but I would have real confidence that every newsroom, every current affairs department in the business is examining that ruling and seeing how it will affect future coverage and scripts and the words they use and so on. It's for them to decide. It's for us to step in later if they're post-transmission, if there's a complaint, and we would look at all that. But there will be endless debates going on inside newsrooms and current affairs and documentary makers about how to make sure they don't fall foul of the Act going forward.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, now I wanted to ask actually about political bias and our old friend GB News, which has had many dozens of Ofcom inquiries, some harder than others. I think about 50, I don't know, Googling it seems they're going up. And definitely some breaches, about 13, I think. I mean, it almost feels that when we used to talk about two Conservative MPs interviewing a Conservative Prime Minister, that was almost... And even the fining of 100k for the Rishi Sunak election show, that almost feels like innocent times, because just recently it feels like watching it, a lot of coverage, a lot of airtime is given to Reform, who've triumphed in these elections that we saw on Thursday. My problem is it seems a bit of a grey area, sort of what counts as a discussion show, what counts as news, whether the programmes are news programmes or topical programmes or even the channels, because you've also got, haven't you, Talk TV, which is also Talk Radio, and LBC. I just wondered if you can help me. Where does Ofcom clarify what is what? Because it's pretty clear with ITN, BBC, Sky News that equal coverage is given. But with these beasts, what do we do with them? Where does the line fall?
We treat all licensed broadcasters equally. They have a duty under the law, which we have to interpret and implement, to be duly impartial, accurate and fair, obviously, as well. And in the case of various channels, you happen to mention GB News, where they have strayed from where there is a complaint, where they have strayed from the path of impartiality, either within a programme itself or within a series of related programmes. The key word is due impartiality. They are judged exactly the same as anybody else. What one has to appreciate in the news, every news bulletin, every news programme, wherever it stems from, whether it's Sky, ITN, BBC, GB News, Talk Radio, everything you see or hear in a news programme is a result of choices that editors make. What story are we going to cover? Who are we going to interview? How are we going to cover the story? What questions are we going to ask? How do we edit? Where do we put it in the running order of the show? How much prominence do we give it, and so on and so on? And how do we balance it? And every newsroom, as you could watch some nights when it's not an obvious hard news story, you'll see different bulletins. I'm a news junkie, I'm afraid. I watch them all to my wife's distraction. But you will see they lead on different stories, they give different emphasis. These are all choices. GB News, since you raised them, they make their choices about what stories they think are of interest. But having made those choices, they are under exactly the same obligations as the BBC, ITN and Sky and everybody else to be fair, accurate and to be duly impartial.
I mean, your own research shows that the public had concerns about serving politicians presenting the news. Isn't that where it gets a bit murky?
I think the public fell short of wanting Ofcom to decide who should or shouldn't be allowed to broadcast.
For current affairs programmes.
For current affairs programmes, yes.
Yeah,
If I can perhaps explain a little bit how the rules work. So the due impartiality requirement for news and current affairs programming, as Michael says, is applied to everybody in the same way, but it very much depends on how broadcasters choose to deliver on that, night by night, day by day, in the programming that they offer. They don't have to give an equal weight to different views. They just need to make sure that due weight is given and that they ensure that there's a broad range of opinions brought to bear in any individual programme. It is individual programmes, that's important to say. It's not about the overall coverage of a channel, it's programme by programme. That's how we work as a regulator. So that's the overall rules. When it comes to politicians, the rule has always been there that politicians may not read the news in news programmes. And the debate has been, in some of the cases that we've opened up recently, about whether the programme was a news and current affairs programme, as we believed it was, and therefore caught by that rule, and that the politician shouldn't have been presenting that part of the programme that was about the news, or whether the programme was only a current affairs programme, in which case the rule on politicians not presenting didn't apply. The court said that we need to clarify those rules, and that's what we're going to be doing very soon, in a matter of days, in fact, to make it clear that politicians shouldn't be presenting news in any programme. And that's very consistent with where audiences are, actually. The research we've done shows that audiences, they really don't think politicians should be presenting the news. They're a bit concerned about politicians presenting current affairs programmes, but when you ask, they wouldn't ban it. And I think we're the broadcast regulator, we're very clear our responsibility is to ensure due impartiality, but not to say what politicians should and shouldn't do beyond that.
Balanced with freedom of expression.
Freedom of expression is central to everything.
When is this consultation happening?
Very soon. It'll be next week.
Next week?
Yeah.
And that's going to stop us saying this is the news. But then you have all this sort of grey areas. Again, one of the mayoral winners is one of your, of the Reform Party, is one of your presenters, and there was ample coverage given to the campaigning. That's not...
Well, the rule is
impartial.
that for any individual programme, there must be a range of views brought to bear. And if a politician, particularly a serving Member of Parliament, is presenting a current affairs show, then that broadcaster has to work harder to make sure that due impartiality is achieved. And there have been a couple of cases where we've looked at individual programmes and we've been clear either that enough was done or that enough wasn't done, and we've given quite a lot of guidance to GB News and others about the sorts of things we expect to see.
The consultation is coming out next week, and then there'll be, I don't know how long, the consultation will be ongoing. I mean, I would suggest that you should unambiguously say that city MPs can't present programmes that deal with these sort of party political matters in the run-up to an election, particularly.
I really don't...
If it's an election, just to be really clear,
Yeah, 'cause we've just come out of the election period.
no candidate or anyone promoting a candidate can present any programme during an election period. That's the statutory period of a general election. So that's a very clear rule. But there is no rule that prevents politicians from presenting current affairs programming at the moment. But if you have got a politician in charge of a current affairs show, then you've got to make sure that you take sufficient steps to bring in a current range, a sufficiently broad range of views into that programme, because of the risk of
I think we would
bias.
I would hope we would all be very uncomfortable about the idea of a regulator deciding who can and can't present programmes, or who should or shouldn't. News is separate.
I think eyebrows were raised at the ample time Dame Andrea Jenkins had, and she's recently, on Thursday, won a mayoral contest. She's one of your presenters, and she was filmed campaigning, so I know people have complained to me about that and asked me to raise it with you both.
Well, it would depend on the individual case. We would investigate it and see if the programme itself was compliant with all our obligations to ensure due impartiality, accuracy and fairness. And there are enough cases that we found where we found broadcasters in breach over the last few years on this issue.
You rightly sanctioned GB News when they were airing various medical misinformation, conspiracy theories about COVID-19 and about climate change. But some of these programmes, so the one that the presenter Neil Oliver used to do, has now moved online. So it's a bit of a loophole that it's not sort of a cathode ray type of delivery, but it is on YouTube. So therefore, the sort of regs don't apply. I think given that increasingly it's pretty academic, whether a channel is an online channel or a traditional broadcast one, isn't it time to get rid of that demarcation and make everyone subject?
That's a matter for Parliament, not for us. We can only regulate those services that we are entitled to regulate through legislation.
I think it also shows that I think for us the bigger questions are around the increasing plurality of our news ecosystem in general. So we could regulate, more services on YouTube, say, but that would not capture podcasts, it wouldn't capture social media. There is so much plurality now, which in many ways is a good thing. But I think we have to be careful that we don't try to regulate everything. That's why we believe that making sure that the really high quality, accurate, impartial news services that we regulate do have sufficient prominence, making sure that they're still there, the public still really value them. 70% of adults get their news, some of their news from TV still, although it's alongside other sources increasingly. We think that's incredibly important to uphold that.
I just feel that, people are working around it. There's no jurisdiction with YouTube, and to the naked eye, when these things get clipped and put out, nobody knows whether they came from YouTube or in the studio version.
The world we live in.
Did someone else have something else on this? Yeah, and then I've got,
Thank you. On the due impartiality rules, you've talked about how they apply to everybody in the same way. Does any channel in particular give you cause for concern regarding their willingness to adhere to the requirements?
No, I don't think so. And in any event, we are a post-transmission regulator, unlike the old days when I started in television. We used to have to take films about Northern Ireland and the Troubles to the regulator to get them approved for broadcasting. That's when I started. We're a long way from that. We are a post-transmission regulator. If there are repeated breaches by an organisation of the same offence, then we would take the appropriate and proportionate action.
Do you feel you have all the regulatory tools available to you that would need to be taken if there were repeated offences?
Yes, and ultimately we will fine if we do get that repeated behaviour. I should say specifically on GB News, obviously they have had some issues with compliance with the code across multiple different parts of the code over the last few years, and we have found them in breach a number of times. But in the recent past, their compliance record has been significantly improved, and ultimately that's what we're aiming for, is to get compliance with the code and to do so in a way that absolutely upholds freedom of expression and the freedom of the broadcaster to innovate. That's incredibly important, but safeguards those standards for the public.
And if I may just add, when we find on a judgment whether we find a breach or we don't find a breach, we do publish a very full account of the arguments as to why we decided to impose some kind of penalty or not, so that helps all broadcasters. They read that and it helps for clarification.
And looking at the due impartiality requirements again, you talked about how they work programme by programme rather than as a channel as a whole. Do you think it might be time to look at it as a channel as a whole, or would that simply duplicate existing work if you're looking programme by programme?
I think it's very hard to see how you do that, and in particular how you do it without being really quite prescriptive and getting into something that I think starts to look more like censorship rather than upholding a standard. post-broadcast, which is what we do. So I think it's just very difficult to know how that would work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Rupert, back to you.
Yeah, Lord Grade, you said freedom of speech is paramount. It just occurred to me, we had CISA sitting over there not long ago.
You had who, sorry?
CISA, the new industry body to stop complaints.
Creative Industries Independent Standards Agency. They were set up to basically clamp down on inappropriate behaviour in the creative industries.
Yeah, it just made me think, because the subject of NDA, non-disclosure agreements, came up. Why should those exist at all in broadcasting? And I know that companies like Global, like The Observer, they do exist, and surely they're stopping the freedom of speech that you talked about. The fourth estate can't do its job if people are terrified to speak out because they've found something.
I understand the point. These are matters for the boards, you know, whether it's the BBC board, the board of Channel 4, the board of Channel 5, whoever it is, Sky, whatever. These are matters. We don't run these companies. We have no management responsibility, thank goodness, for any of these companies. Our role in regulation of these licensed broadcasters is very, very clear, set down in legislation. If there are issues, they should be addressed to the board.
I mean, should these things exist at all?
It's a matter for the individual companies.
I mean, they can be chilling on transparency and people's willingness to come forward and to be a whistleblower or to challenge. Yeah. I think the BBC's work here, which they published only recently, is very comprehensive and does look at the role of independent production companies here and freelancers, and recognise that it's not just the BBC's own employed staff, it's also the companies they work with that set a culture, and they need to ensure that they're doing what they can to support those companies in maintaining standards. So I think it's really good that these issues are on the radar. The BBC's more than on the radar, they're central now to the BBC in particular. The BBC's got to set the gold standard here, in my opinion. They've got a lot of work to do to implement this, but I think their response a week or so ago was very comprehensive, and we were glad to see it. But it's not, as Michael said, an area we regulate.
And I've actually got BBC questions next, but I do think they're a bit slow. The Greg Wallace report, that's still not seen the light of day, has it? That was way before Christmas, and they sort of said, soon it's coming. So I don't think it is satisfactory that they're regulating themselves. And the example I wanted to give, Lord Grade, you had to write a letter on it, is the Gaza How to Survive a War Zone film.
We chose to write a letter. It was a matter of the accusations, the allegations, as yet to be proven or unproven, were very, very serious indeed. And there are occasions, very serious occasions, where we could, if we felt it was justified, step in and start an investigation ourselves. In this particular case, the board of the BBC very quickly responded, and their statement was very, very full once they were alerted to the allegations about the programme. Their statement was very full, and we took the view in Ofcom that we should let the board go through its processes, but we wanted them to know that we reserved our position, and we'll wait to see the report before we decide if we need to take any more action. But I was very pleased to see how quickly the board stepped in and the fullness of the statement that they made in the light of the allegations.
Yeah, I mean, they've been in here as well. Are you satisfied that this is a good enough system that within the BBC?
Sorry. Go on.
You go
on. We did complain a year or two ago about the BBC's complaint system. The way the system is laid out in the agreement is that if you have a complaint about a BBC programme, you complain to the BBC first. If you're not happy with the results, then you have the right of appeal to Ofcom. We will then decide whether to investigate or not. The BBC they lack transparency and they lack responsiveness to a lot of the complaints. That has improved out of recognition as a result of the criticism we made in our annual report on the BBC, which was pretty scathing about their processes. We think the BBC First system should work well. It's working a lot better now.
I mean, more generally, the BBC plays an incredibly important part in our national life, in our democracy, It's in everybody's homes, and it does a very good job. We report on this year by year of producing high quality content, entertainment, news, many other genres, year by year, and they've done that in the context of about a quarter cut in their budget in real terms in the last few years. But they are responsible for £3.5 billion worth of licence fee money. They have a responsibility to govern and manage themselves in an exemplary fashion. Their job is tough. They are under constant public scrutiny, but we as the regulator and the BBC board and the public and the media need to be, constantly challenging the BBC, I think, to continue to do better. And in the behaviours of their presenters, which is a topic we were talking about, on which they published their report last week, they have recognised they have a lot more to do, and I think that's right. And on the programme, the Gaza documentary, that is really about trust between the audience and the BBC. All the information just wasn't available to the viewer and the listener when that programme was first broadcast, and that's the thing that we're most concerned about, because if the BBC can't retain the public's trust, then its ability to, continue to play that important role, which we all want it to play, will be diminished. I think the board understands that. We certainly understand it. And I think the BBC will continue to come under constant scrutiny. It's tough for it. It is not easy, but I think that's right given the role that they play.
On the trust issue, Tim Davey and Samir Shah, when they sat over there, said that they'd had hundreds and hundreds of complaints, and that's what sort of caused the swift action. What measures does Ofcom take to ensure that editorial decisions are sort of made independently and not as a result of external political pressure?
The independence of the BBC and BBC journalism resides with the staff. And, in my experience, both in a spell as a very senior editorial executive in the BBC and as chairman, I would have to say that pressure usually has the opposite effect on the journalists and the programme makers. If there's external pressure not to publish something or to publish something in a certain way, that normally puts the staff, the editorial staff, on red alert. I've never seen any evidence in my long broadcasting career of outside influence, either from your own board, which I have known, from number 10 Downing Street in whatever colour it was. I've never seen that effective in changing the editorial sense. Once you bow to that kind of pressure, trust has gone forever. And that includes commercial. You could have advertisers saying, we're not going to advertise with you at ITV or Channel 4 if you publish this programme about rotten eggs or whatever the programme is about. It doesn't work in this country. That's a very, very strong tradition and strong culture in the newsrooms and the journalists and programme makers.
They're conducting their inquiry into this one and also into Greg Wallace, which we've never heard anything about what happened to that. What sort of criteria will you at Ofcom use to judge whether their own internal processes are sufficient? Well,
we will look at the report, which they have undertaken to publish within certain legal parameters.
This is on the Gaza documentary.
On the Gaza documentary. We will look at that and decide whether or not they have satisfactorily dealt with what may or may not be proven to be breaches of our code, etc. And we will look at it in that light. Greg Wallace's behavioural issues are matters for the board of the BBC. The BBC board are the custodians of the public interest in the BBC, not us. They manage the BBC, and the executive who conduct the affairs of the BBC on a day-to-day basis are accountable to that board. I'm very pleased to see recently that the board of the BBC has been a little bit more open and taking an interest publicly and explaining themselves to the public. I think that's a very good sign. I think that's augurs well for Samir Shah's reign there. I think that's a very good move. There have been, when I arrived at Ofcom, there were various controversies, and the BBC board was absolutely silent on the matters, which I don't think is helpful to maintaining public trust.
And then just lastly on this, the BBC's own editorial guidelines say We must take due care over the physical and emotional welfare of the dignity of under 18s who take part or are otherwise involved in our editorial content, irrespective of any consent given by them or a parent, guardian or other person in acting in loco parentis. I don't know, it's being reported that the child in the documentary is now having online threats of the family. Just people say never work with animals and children. Is that where this all went wrong?
I mean, look, we've been kept closely abreast of the BBC's work on this documentary. They have not concluded it yet, though, and we will need to consider when they finish their report whether there are any issues for us as the broadcast regulator with the programme. That will be the locus that we would have on this. So I think we just have to now wait for them to get on with this work and conclude it, which we expect them to do quite soon now, in the next week or two, I hope.
A lot of inquiries going on. Okay, thanks.
Thanks so much. And finally, Bayer.
Thank you. Hi, Dame Melanie. This is a question for yourself. What is Ofcom's current understanding of what advertising is covered by the less healthy food legislation, which comes into force in October?
This is a matter for the Advertising Standards Authority to lead on. We are the backstop enforcement body for that work. So the ASA has been leading on the consultation. And look, they've had a lot of responses back from their consultation about the particular question around brand advertising. And I think that's currently being given quite a bit of thought. I hope that there will be clarity for the industry. I think everybody wants that, but it's still very much under discussion.
Okay. Because you mentioned earlier, just how important it is with regards to the trust and the fact that the BBC, they're in our lives, they're in our homes. Do you believe secondary legislation is needed?
On the question of less healthy foods? I can't say. I think the Advertising Standards Authority is in charge of this piece of work. We are supporting them. The government's obviously considering this. The consultation, led to lots and lots of responses, as you're, I think, hinting at. And that's under discussion at the moment. But I can't say definitively what the response needs to be. It's not an area for Ofcom to lead on.
Yeah. How do you feel we can achieve sort of certainty? Because, you mentioned that there's a degree of clarity that's needed. So how do we get to that point?
Well, this is why you consult, is to get people's views. And what people have said is it isn't clear, it isn't, the line isn't drawn in the right place. There's quite a lot of concerns that people have had about it. So the right response now, I think, is for the ASA to be thinking about where to go next. That's what's going on. They're doing it in discussion with us. I'm sure the government are discussing it with them as well. And everybody wants to get to a position of clarity on this. It's a big set of changes, and it's disruptive, as new regulation always is. But no one wants to be in a situation where people aren't sure what the rules are, or where they feel that they're having, an impact that wasn't intended initially by Parliament.
Brilliant. Oh, great. Would you? Is there anything else you'd like to?
No. I think Melanie's covered it very well.
Okay, brilliant. Obviously, the legislation comes in October. Do we need it before then? Would you be supportive of the legislation moving quicker?
I think October is probably still quite a fast deadline now, given that obviously there has been quite a bit of debate about this. So that's the timetable that is currently there.
Okay. And have you considered the consequences for the sort of commercial public sector broadcasters in the uncertainty if it leads to sort of bigger than expected sort of hits on their sort of commercial revenue?
The PSBs have always been very clear that this will reduce their advertising revenues. They've been concerned about that, and they made representations on those issues during the passage of the original legislation, and they have certainly made similar representations in private and in public during the consultation that has followed on the details that the ASA has been running. So I think those views are absolutely understood and on the table. Obviously, there are policy objectives around public health that the government decided, the government of the day decided were important, that led them to want to legislate on this in the first place.
There are quite often new areas of advertising that suddenly appear. I mean, not that many years ago, there was no such thing as a market comparator website. Now the airwaves are full of ads for that particular sector. Nobody Nobody forecasts that. So there's always new sectors coming along that want to advertise that may replace or outdo the fast food sector. We shall see. So it's not a matter of that money goes forever. There may be new people coming in, new products, new ideas that people need to market with impact through the PSBs. So it's not all doom and gloom, I don't think.
Okay, that's good to know. Are you concerned? Are you concerned about the broadcasters and the impact on revenue streams?
I think we're concerned overall with PSB sustainability, which is why we're reviewing that and working on it, as we were discussing earlier, with a deadline of before summer recess for us to come out with our proposals. So I think there's broader concerns. Yes, definitely. The PSBs are still delivering really well for audiences. They've sustained their programme spend. That was what we found when we published our 5-year review in December of what's going on. But all of the headwinds are very difficult for them over the future, particularly in finding audiences and being discovered by audiences, but also then in being able to make a commercial return. So those broader questions are absolutely on our radar.
Brilliant. Thank you. Was there any other points you'd like to sort of make?
No, that's fine.
Covered it well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bio. So this legislation is due to come into force in October, and we still have no clarity as to what the scope of it will be. You feel a bit lackadaisical about that. It feels, clearly, you're the regulator, you're the ones that are going to enforce it. Surely you need clarity as, for example, whether you're talking about a ban of advertising a product or a brand, for example. Isn't there more that it feels like there's a bit of an impasse between the ASA and yourselves and the government? I mean, don't you think you should be doing more to give this a bit of a kick up the backside?
I don't think there's an impasse. I think there's a lot of discussions going on this at the moment, but the lead is with the ASA. They're the ones with the expertise in the advertising industry. They've been leading all the engagement. We are the enforcement backstop. It's a co-regulatory relationship, and so we're working in partnership with them. It's very live at the moment, as I think I've been indicating, and I hope we can get to clarity soon on it. And everyone's very aware of that deadline of October, which I think everyone's quite keen to meet.
What are you doing to kind of...
Well, we're closely involved in all the conversations.
Yeah. Lord Grade, you worked at a very senior level in TV broadcasting. I mean, to what extent at this stage of the year would TV company need certainty as to what forms of advertisement they could take financial payment for?
Well, as the market gets more stressed, as more and more money moves online, and as the economy goes up and down, the biggest concern that free-to-air advertiser-supported broadcasters have is how late the advertisers make their commitments. The money gets later and later, so it's harder and harder to project what your revenue is going to be. You're committed. There's a long lead time for programs. You have to commit your program budget, and so on. It was ever thus. Frankly, it's one of the costs of doing business. You've got that, and there's always uncertainty somewhere or another in that transactional world between advertisers and broadcasters. So this is price of doing business as far as I'm concerned.
You wouldn't be putting any pressure on all the players in this to come to a swift...
Oh, they are. They're lobbying like crazy. They want clarity between the brand and product and a decision. But what you want is the right decision based on evidence, and a lot of very big stakeholders in this debate. And there's the ASA has got to allow time for all that information to come in, all that evidence and all the depositions and advocacy that's come in. They've got to make the right decision at the end. You can have a decision tomorrow, but it may not be the right one.
And then, can I pick your brains about something else?
Please.
So over the weekend it's been reported that the Prime Minister's contemplating abolishing the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. I mean, it's quite a busy time for that department at the moment. It's particularly for some of the things you're involved in. It's got the implementation of the Media Act, the kicking off of the BBC Charter review, not to mention the start of the football regulation process, which again I think you probably have less involvement in, and then of course the potentially the existential threat to our film industry of US tariffs. Would you say that getting rid of the department at this stage was a good idea?
Well, I haven't been consulted on it.
But if they were to pick up the phone and say, Lord Grade, do you think we should scrap the Department for Culture, Media and Sport? What would your advice be?
I'd be very happy that it wasn't my decision. Only a government can know. Only government can know whether that's a good move or a bad move. We've moved since the election. Our sponsoring department is now DCIT. We work with DCIT and DCMS. It'll be what it'll be. This is way beyond my pay grade.
So you wouldn't opine on it?
No.
No. Okay, interesting. Dame Melanie, the report suggests that therefore, the department's work would be split between business and trade, education and also treasury. So you'd be then potentially working not just between DCMS and DCIT, but you'd be then spread even more thin with all your governmental partners. How would this impact you?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, it is just a news report, isn't it? And it really isn't for us to opine on. Whatever the machinery of government, Ofcom will work with a range of government departments. Although our sponsor department is DCIT and we have a strong relationship with DCMS, we already work with the business department on postal regulation, on regulation generally. We work closely with the Treasury and Number 10 when we were all discussing growth earlier in the year and making sure that we were all doing everything we needed to do and developing plans there. So working with multiple government departments is our day-to-day life, and sometimes I think Ofcom can help by joining up across departmental boundaries because we can see that overall picture for the communications industries of telecoms, media and technology. So we will make any system work, but at this stage it is just speculation, isn't it?
We can conclude that the chair and the chief exec of Ofcom are both relaxed about the DCMS department being scrapped.
I don't think that's quite what we've said.
No, I don't think we have any. We're completely
it's
neutral.
It's not for us. I think we're in violent agreement that it's above our respective pay grades.
You have no opinion on the DCMS?
The important thing, if there are changes, whatever the changes are, that there aren't turf wars between departments, that there's absolute clarity of who's responsible for what. That's the position you want to get to. And that, at the moment, as between DCMS and DCIT, it's very clear who's responsible for what, and there are no turf wars.
Okay, so not relaxed, ambivalent.
Neutral.
It's just not a question for us. I think wrong for us to express an opinion.
But it will impact you. So, it's just useful for us to have an idea of what that impact might look like. But you don't know. Okay, anything else you'd like to share with the committee before we let you flee?
Thank you very much.
Was there anything that you hoped we'd ask you that we haven't?
Can't think of anything.
Was there anything that you feared we'd ask you that we haven't?
No.
You wouldn't tell me, would you? Lovely to see you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Order.